Hey, everybody, it's Tuesday at our usual time, and because of recent small minor technical issues at the start of the stream, we're going to first make sure we sound good, and then start, rather than start and having to stop and, make sure everything's okay. So, first things first, wait to see if anyone comments that our sound is not good, and then we'll proceed. So far, no one's saying the sound is off, so that's a good sign. All right, so that sounds good. So, welcome back, Westorians. It is Tuesday, circa 6 o'clock Eastern Standard. My name is Aziz, and it is a time for our weekly Fire and Blood live stream. It is so much fun digesting new material. I find myself every week reading my copy of Fire and Blood just to try to see if I can find one or two more nuggets to add to the stream. And that's how it's going to be for a while because, well, we got over 700 pages of new material and people are still figuring out things about A Storm of Swords, a Game of Thrones, books that have been out for far longer. So it stands to reason that even though this isn't written exactly like a novel, there's going to be lots of things we're figuring out about this book for quite a while still. As we have been doing every week, we have brought on some fun guests to talk about some cool topics. In this case, we had bit off more than we could chew in a previous episode and had a lot left over. And so we brought back one of the two guests from that episode because she had contributed so many fantastic notes on this topic of the new Tower of Joy associated with the Golden Wedding and Rogar, Baratheon, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, and the War for the White Cloaks, as well as the Doctrine of Exceptionalism. These are our targets for today. I'm going to stop calling them, I'm going to stop saying that we're going to get to everything in one day because we keep coming up a little short and you never know how long these discussions will go. So we're going to try to get to all those things. I'm going to stop promising that we're going to actually do them. So without any further ado, let's introduce our guests. First off is our returning guest from 2 weeks ago, very familiar around these parts, Lady Gwyn. Welcome back.
Hello. Great to be back. I'm excited to talk about some of these topics. Like you said, I had some thoughts about quite a few of them.
You are one of the fandom's reigning experts on the Tower of Joy, so not only did you contribute so much to the notes for this episode, but because of your knowledge on this topic, it really just would have been a mistake not to bring you back. And of course, I also should mention Chloe, whose notes also we are using some of for this episode. She was our co-guest the same episode as Lady Gwyn was, so thanks to her because we're going to be using some of her notes in this episode. But returning to the show as well, this is his first appearance on our Fire and Blood streams, but not nearly his first appearance on History of Westeros podcast, is Stephen Attewell. Welcome back, Stephen.
Hello. Glad to be back.
Right on. Stephen, of course, has been a big part of our Blackfire series, and tell us what you're working on these days. I know you're still doing your write-ups, and you're doing write-ups on Fire and Blood too, right?
So yeah, I've gone through, let me see, 10 chapters of Fire and Blood. I'm a little bit further than we're gonna get in this episode. I'm thinking of taking a break after I'm done with the Jaehaerys section because it is quite a lot of material. And it's been a little bit burnouty to try to sort of wrestle these giant chapters into some sort of coherent frame. And also, I want to finish that short story I was writing, and I want to do a little bit more Storm of Swords, and then I'll start doing more Fire and Blood.
Cool. So yeah, so you're as far as your long-running chapter write-ups, you said you're on Storm of Swords. I've lost track because I've lost track of a lot of people's creative efforts right now because of Fire and Blood, to be honest. So tell us where you're at on that.
The last one I did, I believe, was Jaime 4 back in October.
Okay, and
it's been a good while.
Which one is Jaime 4? The numbers
that's the one where he gets to Harrenhal and has his hand sewn up by Qyburn.
Oh, so it's just the chapter before the bath scene, is that, or is it the same one? Before?
Yeah,
okay,
it's the one before.
Great. All right, that's excellent. Yes, Stephen does wonderful work covering the chapters one at a time on his blog, Race for the Iron Throne. And you're doing all kinds of projects. We couldn't possibly list them all here, but we'll maybe name a few more of them when we do our outro. Okay, well, we're getting started in the right way. We already have a super chat from Acre Frey who says, you know what brings real joy? I already said it wrong. Already! Irish wristwatches. Okay, I don't think we've ever had Steven say Irish wristwatch, so that's a...
Irish wrist watches. I just took my time at it, paused a little bit at wrist, but got through it.
Slow and steady is the key.
It's true. Yeah. Slow and steady definitely wins the race and tongue twister. See, this is a man who knows what he's doing. Okay, so as always, you can suggest questions, suggest topics. I've been trying to wrestle with this, like Steven says, it's a lot of material, and to try to get these streams a little more organized. My goal sort of is to make each live stream a little bit more organized than the last, and in doing that, one particular piece of effort I've put into that is trying to nail down all the different topics we want to cover, trying to put them under different umbrellas, as well as map out who the guests are going to be as far in advance as possible. So that should help have fewer problems with us running over, not covering everything we wanted to cover in an episode. The topics will be a little tighter. So that's my goal, but I also we definitely want to rely on your feedback as much as possible. So if you have topic suggestions for Fire and Blood, we'll certainly take those into account. Some of the obvious ones that are that we're percolating around on, or maybe not obvious, we've talked about covering the Shivers, which we expect to do that next week. The Winter Fever as well. We want to talk about Aegon III quite a lot eventually, compare him to Jon Snow, as well as analyze him on his own. We want to do a comparison of Criston Cole and Barristan Selmy. We want to compare Varys and Larys. We want to talk about the Sea Snake and Oakenfist and all the different queens, Rhaena and Alyssa, as well the ones who were widowed and the ones who weren't. Widowed queens are kind of an interesting thing because you don't see widower kings. They're kind of a unique class of their own. And there's a lot of parallels between Rhaena and Cersei and a lot of other parallels between some of these other characters. So we'll get to those when we do. And get that sorted. Of course, we're going to have a couple of parallel lives this episode. And let's see, what other announcements do we have? Shea just recorded a guest episode with Girls Gone Canon, speaking of Chloe, who we mentioned earlier, but that's not up yet. So we will certainly let you all know when it is. That's on, which chapter? It was on Sansa, right? Sansa 2? Elaine 2, of course. Elaine 2 for Feast for Crows. Great chapter. We also just put up our Gagasos episode. It's up for patrons right now, and it's only going to be up for patrons. We do a patrons only episode about once a year, and well, this one really would have been 2018's version of that. It's all about blood magic and sorcery and Targaryens being part dragon and fireworms and Victarion's arm and all sorts of cool stuff like that. So there are now 3 patrons only episodes from History of Westeros: Aziz versus the Feast for Crows prologue, me covering the North Remembers chapter, and now this one. So if you sign up on Patreon, you can get up to 3 bonus episodes. All right, so speaking of that, let's do a couple shout-outs. Our first sword is Jeff Gnarly, the Long Snapper, and we have a couple of Dragon Rider patrons to shout out as well. That would be Telenis the Talon, King of Gagasos, Rider of Telarius, a red dragon with scales, horns, and talons of Midnight Black, and Robert IV of House Ardeacor, Burned King of Blazewater Bay, Rider of Atraxis, the black dragon with bioluminescent spots like smoldering embers and a banded blue tail. Cool. That's that. Let's get into it. We're going to go in a roughly chronological order as it applies to these topics, but there's, of course, going to be some overlap, as there always is. So I think we'll start with the Golden Wedding. The Golden Wedding is, I think, is going to have some relevance to A Song of Ice and Fire coming forward. In The Winds of Winter, I think we're going to see the opposite of what Varys has been doing, meaning that he's been creating chaos and undermining the royal family and, making riots and things like that. I think since now his chosen candidate is landed on Westeros and making war on the Seven Kingdoms, trying to take the throne, all of a sudden these things are going to start going right. Things are going to start working out for Aegon. Somehow behind the scenes, things are going to be working for him instead of against the Lannisters and the Tyrells and all that. So maybe we'll see the peasants, happier with him. Maybe see some behind the scenes alliances. And how does this all relate to the wedding? Well, I think that they're going to have to make a big splash to show that Aegon is this type of person that Varys and Illyrio have been making him out to be. This king who grew up amongst the commoners, who knows what it's like to suffer and all that. So let's start off with y'all's takes on how this might relate to the Young Griff plot and how, some of these things we expect them to do to legitimize him and to make him popular. We'll start with Stephen.
So, I mean, I guess the sort of the clearest example, if there is going to be a second Golden Wedding, I think the clearest parallel is this idea that what a big wedding allows you to do is bring together the whole of the political class to one place and then use, ostentatious excellence and what's the right word that I'm looking for here? Sort of stagecraft to kind of overawe them and get them to buy into the narrative and the political structure that you're selling. So, in the case of the Golden Wedding, right, you have the Hightowers and the Lannisters and the Starks and the Marcher Lords and even some foreign dignitaries. And you've got this sort of, tens of thousands of people watching. You have the High Sept in there. That might happen in the new one, depending on how you interpret the whole line about the Mummer's Dragon and the cheering crowd. They had a mock sea battle.
That's crazy.
In the waters of Blackwater Bay. That's pretty impressive. And feasting and all that stuff. And there's sort of a darker side to some of this as well.
Oh yeah.
Especially with sort of what Rogar gets up to.
Yeah, what on earth?
With all those party.
The women, yeah, that is just.
So yeah, I can definitely see. I mean, Varys is someone, who has always sort of put forward an argument for symbolic politics. I mean, that is actually what his whole speech about the
how power works.
The sellsword and the knight, the sellsword, the merchant, the king, and the priest. That was the actual meaning of it. It's sort of an argument against the kind of, you win or you die hard politics of the Lannisters. So I can see that happening. Yeah,
the Golden Wedding almost to me is not. It certainly does compare in some ways to the Purple Wedding, because that was also a really large, ostentatious display that was sort of, but it wasn't really trying to heal the realm. It was really just for the Lannisters and their allies. It wasn't. They weren't really trying to invite the Riverlands and the North. But the Tournament of Harrenhal. Now that, especially as a prequel episode to the Tower of Joy, which is kind of what we're focusing on here, it brought everybody together. It wasn't necessarily. The big difference here is the Golden Wedding is falling, like Stephen said, it's bringing everybody together after a lot of conflict, and that's a big important kind of stopover. So, Lady Gwyn, let's get your thoughts on this stuff as well.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the Purple Wedding. I think it's a very different situation, but there's been conflict, and what the Lannisters need to do at that point is project their power, right?
Yeah, definitely has that element,
and some form of stability. They're trying to say, while they're not bringing the entire realm together, they've got their primary allies there, and they're trying to project, hey, everything's good here. We're powerful and we have it all under control. So I think as a symbol of power, this great ostentatious event is something that we could well see again.
Yeah.
And
right.
As far as young Griff goes, I mean, is it too soon to talk about whether we might see a wedding for him?
No, I think that's really, I definitely wanted to talk about that, because I think that's maybe what some of this is pointing to. If obviously Westeros right now is more war-torn than it was before this Golden Wedding. I mean, Maegor and the Faith and all that was pretty bad, but I think Westeros right now is worse.
Yeah, I would say.
It's certainly gone on for, well, I don't know how you calculate it, in terms of the, rebellions against Aenys all the way through Maegor's War of the Faith.
That's a good point.
There was, his war against Prince Aegon. So it's a little bit kind of choppier, but it's certainly the War of Five Kings has gone on for a long time, and I think had less in the way of stability. you know, once Maegor takes over, you know, he is not really dislodged until he dies. I mean, you know, there people keep rising up against him and then he just smashes them flat. Whereas I feel like in the War of Five Kings to this point, there have been a lot of moments where, you know, I mean, kings have been assassinated, the Lannisters have been on the back foot, you know, Renly died. Like there's a lot of change, you know, and people not being sure which way to go. So I think like a second Golden Wedding, I think the potential advantages is that it could potentially symbolically offer like stability. Like, okay, we have a status quo, we have a potential solution to like not just who can win the fighting, but like what does the world after the war look like? Who's in charge? What are the sources of their legitimacy, etc.
Good, well said. And an interesting question to ask here that is certainly off the beaten path of Fire and Blood, but a great question to talk about, especially because it relates to this, is who is young Griff going to marry? Is it going to be Arianne? Do you guys think it's going to be Arianne, or do you maybe think it'll be somebody else? And that's maybe a little bit of a parallel to the way this played out. Not this, because the Golden Wedding was Alyssa and Rogar, not Jaehaerys and Alysanne. But Jaehaerys, they never actually picked a bride for Jaehaerys because he managed to do his thing and keep Alysanne. Alysanne was supposed to be married off, and that's what kicked off the whole, wait, we're not doing that. We're marrying each other. So I think, so that's a good question I think maybe we should talk about right now. Do you guys have thoughts on who you think young Griff's going to marry, or do you think it's kind of up in the air, or what?
Yeah, I think, for me, I think it's Arianne, mostly because, I mean, obviously that I feel like the spoiler chapters are pointing us in that direction, but I really think the legitimacy that he would gain by marrying a Dornish princess like his father did really can't be denied, you know, drawing that direct line from him to Rhaegar. Not to mention political and military benefit of an alliance with Dorne. But on the other hand, there is a good case to be made for the Tyrells throwing in with Aegon, and assuming Tommen doesn't make it, you could make a pretty good case that Marjorie
another husband for Marjorie.
Yeah,
go for the fourth one. I don't know.
I'm of the opinion that Arianne, for a couple, you know, for most of the reasons that you mentioned, plus I think a few others. One is that, you know, given that there's already going to be this, you know, since Aegon the Sixth is sort of in the shoes of Perkin Warbeck, right? He is representing a supposedly dead king. So he has a kind of a legitimacy issue himself. And there is no better, you know, we saw this with John Connington's letter of saying, like, you know, to the Martells, like, recognize this person as your kinsman, you know, and marry them. And like, there can be no stronger statement than a marriage alliance that like you think someone is who they say they are. So I think in that sense, it definitely seems like Arianne to me. The other is sort of a more metafictional perspective, which is that I think it has to do with short-term versus long-term. And I think that's sort of the story of like Aegon's rise and fall in the next book, is that, you know, in the short term, right? Arianne's the one who's got an army on call. She's the one there right now. And, you know, he's on the verge of winning it all, right? He just needs to defeat this one army that stands between him and King's Landing, and he's got the Iron Throne. The problem is that the long-term play, to the extent that you buy, you know, the story that Tyrion sold him on in A Dance with Dragons, is that you need to keep your hand open for Daenerys and her dragons. And that, you know, like, I never think there was a strong possibility that Daenerys was going to accept a secondary role in a Targaryen restoration. But, like, she's definitely not going to go for being the, like, junior wife.
Wife number
of someone
2.
who's already married. You know, like, they can try for the whole, you know, Aegon and Rhaenys and Visenya thing. But, like, I think that's going to be the sort of part of the, like, the hubristic move of Aegon, is that he's going to go for the short-term victory. He's going to marry Arianne, take King's Landing, and then Daenerys shows up, and he's going to, like, you know, say, like, okay, I'll marry you too. And then it's like, okay, no go. We're having a second dance, the dragons. A much shorter one.
Yeah, much shorter. Much shorter. So also, as far as some things we've said, the wedding would also give a chance to maybe allow the realm to heal if they have some sort of big wedding. And it would also allow, as weddings always do, scheming, because you have all these people in power that are in the same place at one time. And of course, there's always the opportunity for assassinations like the Purple Wedding. That seems maybe not that likely to happen again. But we could have something really epic. Maybe just entertaining a theory, some theories that are out there. For example, like the wildfire is going to be a thing at King's Landing at some point. That's been heavily foreshadowed. The TV show gave us their version of that, which I think is going to be pretty different in the books. But I do think something like that will happen. Just imagine these two things together. Imagine some sort of wildfire disaster during a big wedding. I could call it the green wedding.
Why not?
Yeah. All the other colors are getting
rainbow.
covered. Yeah.
Right.
Gotta have a green wedding. But I know there's a lot of possibilities there, but it's also kind of absurd to think about spending that much money, both the Golden Wedding and this potential wedding of Phaegon, given what the realm has just been through. Like, Cersei is shoving the Iron Bank out the door like, nah, we're not going to pay you right now. So where is this money going to come from if indeed it's going to happen? I wonder if...
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it was a major political issue for the early portion of Jaehaerys' reign, that like the cost of the Golden Wedding like had a dramatic impact on the royal treasury and thus on sort of economic policy that pretty much created a recession. So it's sort of, again, that sort of short term versus long term, right? In the short term, a magnificent spectacle is going to win you a lot of goodwill. But like, if that then necessitates, punishing taxation to pay the bills, you might lose all of the goodwill that you've gained.
That makes sense. Yeah. Let's throw out a few numbers here, just so we get to recap just exactly how huge this wedding was. It's 40,000 small folk, with the suggestion that that it was possibly quite a bit larger than that. That the 40,000 was maybe a low estimate. You have the Hightowers and the High Septon. You have Lyman Lannister, who is the same lord that sheltered Aegon the Uncrowned and Rhaena. You have Brandon Stark, who is Lord of Winterfell at the time, father to Alaric and Walton. Walton's the one that was killed by giants later. And then we have 30 Night's Watch brothers, which struck me as slightly odd. Not too odd, but maybe a little odd. Did you guys think that was noteworthy at all, that there were Night's Watch brothers there?
I think it's more just the number of them. Like 30 is a lot.
Yeah.
Even given the fact that we're dealing with I think the Night's Watch at this point was it 10,000 strong?
Well, it was 20,000 when Aegon landed, and it was supposedly wilting pretty fast given the lack of warring between all the kingdoms. Yeah.
But it's going to increase. It's increased in size recently because a lot of the Maegor's supporters and the Faith Militant ended up going to the wall.
Good point.
But still, I think it's a significant number.
Yeah. What about you, Lady Gwyn? Did that stand out to you at all?
Yeah, it did. I'm just the number to go that far south. It's a long ways to travel. It was a long ways for the Starks, and they brought 12 Lords Bannermen with them too, and all their retinues. So this is like another retinue, another Lords Bannerman with them. They do go to Winterfell. We've seen groups of them show up there. So
That's
maybe
true.
They were just happened to be there, and whoever was the Lord Commander said, well, we might as well send a detachment.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because of to honor what might have been already evident, that he had some sort of commitment to the Watch, because he was already sending people there.
That's true.
This is in advance of that becoming problematic.
Yeah, it was before his visit there, but maybe he had indicated he was going to visit and had treated them well, etc.
Yeah, he had already sent a bunch of people up there. So, and
Chloe had left us a note here from last time that said that we have to keep our perspective on the Night's Watch, which we did that a little bit with talking about how many people were in it, but also it's been, at this point in time, it's been the wall. When we're introduced to the wall at the beginning of A Song of Ice and Fire, there's already been people fleeing because they've been seeing the others. Like this, the prologue is not the first time something kind of like that had happened. And so our perspective is already the wall is having, there's already a clear and present danger for them, and there isn't necessarily a current issue for them at this time. Maybe it's a time of peace. Maybe the wall's been quiet. Maybe they just have a little more leeway to send some people. Anyway, it's fair to not to point out that there could be some significant differences in the status here. Good call by commenter Aaron Ginsberg, who mentions that the journey for all these people is so much longer because we're still not to having the King's Road yet. There's no King's Road. A lot of these other roads don't exist. So very good point. This traveling to this wedding would be a real deal for a lot of, especially the brothers of the Night's Watch. So, wow. Yeah. Great point. That's another thing we're used to. A Song of Ice and Fire has roads, but before Jaehaerys, not so much. So more important guests. We have the sister of the Prince of Dorne. We have the son of the Sea Lord. We have 22 Magisters from Pentos. We have the Archon of Tyrosh and his daughter. And that's kind of interesting. I think that the Archon of Tyrosh is involved. Anytime you hear the Archon of Tyrosh getting involved in Westerosi politics, of course, my head goes straight to the Blackfires. But it's more of a fact that Tyrosh is, of the Free Cities, one of the closest physically located to Westeros, along with Pentos and Braavos. So they have a little more commerce with the politics matter a little more, them as a trading place. But let's hear your guys' takes on these guests in general, in particular the Archon, but whoever else you want to comment on.
I think it's also the structure of the polity, which is Archons, if I recall correctly, serve for life. And and there's one of them. Whereas like the Magisters, anytime you've got a council of Magisters, right, that's a little bit complicated from a sort of feudal medieval mindset to be like, okay, who's the person in charge? Who is of equal status to a king? Well, an Archon is, close enough, right? It's something that you can deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And, Sea Lord is in a similar situation. We've had Sea Lords marry or, engaged to be married to royalty before. So
yeah.
It's an option. And it reminds me a little bit of just sort of like that tension that you see a little bit in medieval English history of sort of, do you marry the foreign princess or do you marry at home? That, a foreign princess is supposed to come with advantages, but then you have this sort of complicated, European politics of like, okay, are you, aligning with France, or are you aligning with Spain or somewhere else? And are you going to get the dowry? And, what does this mean to the broader, balance of power? Whereas, and then you're always going to get some sort of like nationalist backlash. Whereas, if you marry a local, now you have the issue of, okay, who do you marry and what does that do to the internal balance of power?
Well said. So, Lady Gwyn, you had some interesting notes on the Archon of Tyrosh popping up in quite a few places where power is an issue.
Yes, a lot of times there's a long history, it seems like, of Archons angling to marry or form these alliances with Targaryens, going back right to this time. This Archon brings his daughter. She'll later be floated as a possible match for Jaehaerys. I think it was one of Rogar's favored choices. Alyssa didn't want the girl with the green hair. She wanted a nice local girl. But besides that, we'll see it again in Aegon III's cattle show. We have, of course, the Daemon Blackfire and with Rohan Tyrosh. There is a brother of an Archon at Dany's wedding to Drogo. Who knows what he was doing there? Nice. Just an honored guest, maybe scoping out Viserys, or they always seem to be there. And then this was a note from Chloe that from The Princess in the Tower, there was apparently an Archon's daughter who was involved in Doran's plans somehow around what he was doing with his kids, and so
wasn't Arianne going to become a cupbearer?
Yeah,
yes,
that's
it.
And that was how she was going to meet. That's
Viserys.
how she was going to like meet Viserys.
Yeah, that's pretty
so
cool.
The question would be, what was the daughter was going to come to Westeros? Was there some plan for her? Were they going to marry her off to someone in Westeros? Finally, they were going to nab a prince or someone.
Well, I'm sure they would have wanted a quid pro quo.
Oh,
maybe, think of Quentin or something, so.
Yeah.
They're there lingering around the edges all the time, it seems to me, just trying to find their angle to get involved. So.
And if we have another thing that happens at the Golden Wedding, which I think is interesting, that I also think is super, super relevant to A Song of Ice and Fire, is Jaehaerys' sort of coming out to the realm. This is him. He gets to meet all these lords and ladies for the first time who before had only heard of him, and they had heard good things. But you get all these quotes from lords who met him for the first time, and it reminds me of the lords meeting Robb Stark for the first time, where they're kind of testing him for his youth, but they come out like, that's actually a good kid. Like, especially Great John by far is the most memorable there. I mean, having your fingers bitten off and talking about blood, his meat being tough. Like, you can't, he swallows up all the other anecdotes, but still there were others.
I kind of have a different historical parallel here, which is,
oh, cool.
I got really strong vibes of like FDR and Eleanor Roosevelt from Jaehaerys and Alysanne.
Okay.
Especially, if you look at the quotes from people who met with Jaehaerys while he was doing the conciliating, while like Rogar was off killing things in the forest, they're all completely opposite, right? They're all saying like, oh, he's very humble. Oh, he's very clever. Oh, he doesn't say much, right? And and they're not consistent. And that really reminds me of FDR, who was both a very good listener. He was, someone who could get along well with people in one-on-one situations, but he had this amazing gift for making people think that he agreed with them without committing himself. So that they would go away from a meeting thinking like, okay, the president's on my side. Wait a second. Did he actually say that he was going to do this?
That's pretty smart.
And that was an enormous, gift for him, in that, if someone wanted something that he didn't want to give them, he knew how to be just vague enough so that he could sort of get away, step away from it later. Whereas, if it was something that he really did need, then he could say, well, I've been for it all along. And then at the same time that Jaehaerys is meeting with all the lords, Alysanne is meeting with all the ladies. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of the first of her women's courts, which remind me a lot, especially when we get to her one in the north, of Eleanor Roosevelt's listening tours, where, I mean, obviously the situations are very different. That, FDR, because of his polio, couldn't travel very much, or it was more difficult. So Eleanor would go out touring the country and bring reports back to FDR and say you need to follow up on this, or, this is what people care about here. And it was like a sign by proxy of presidential sympathy and engagement. And I feel like Alysanne kind of fulfills a similar role, especially when we get to the widow's law and the law of the first night.
Right on.
Where it's not just sort of a ceremonial exercise, it's lobbying.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's also, it's grassroots, almost grassroots, being championed by a member of the royalty. It's kind of
as close as you can probably get in
this setting. Yeah, you have to have a sponsor. There's no such thing as a true grassroots movement in medieval times. It isn't like a riot or something. So let's take a brief detour and do parallel lives, one somewhat relevant to this, and then we'll come back with the War of the White Cloaks, which is also probably quite relevant to young Griff, who's going to have to choose a Kingsguard. All right. Today, as always, we do usually, well, one time we only did one of these, but usually we're going to do two of these, and today is no exception. We're going to do two of these today. I'm going to start with, as always, a character from the modern series, and you will match him with a character from history. In this case, we'll go with someone who is indecisive and clever. someone whose ill health made them look older. In one case, we have in both cases, we have a troublesome warrior brother. In both cases, that brother was sent into exile. Nonetheless, those brothers did sometimes manage to work well together for long stretches. Both of these characters faced rebellion, and both of them fled during that rebellion to a more safe location. Well, safe in their minds. So we'll come back. I'll let y'all think about who that might be. The main character that we're talking about is Doran Martell. So who in history reminds you of that character? Who has those same traits? And when we come back with the answer, I'll expand on those comparisons and give a few other comparisons as well as potential foreshadowing for what's going to happen with Doran. So let's talk a little bit about the War of the White Cloaks, and then we'll come back with the answer to that one. So at the beginning of the Golden Wedding, one of my favorite moments of conciliating in the book is Jaehaerys inviting Joffrey Doggett to join his Kingsguard. I just thought that was really well written, really cool, just really good. Mm-hmm. And but that leaves him with only two. He has Giles Morgan and Joffrey Doggett, so he needs 5 more. And interestingly, they decide to have like a tournament of sorts at this Golden Wedding. To choose via prowess. Like they're saying, the best fighters here are going to become my Kingsguard, which is really interesting because this is something that's come up several times. There's 2 schools of thought on Kingsguard. Visenya outright rejected the suggestion when Aegon the Conqueror said, let's have a tournament. And Visenya was like, no, they got to be able to fight well, but more importantly is loyalty. And this is where Jaehaerys and young Griff are not on the same page, because young Griff is more of Visenya's mind, though John Connington more shares Jaehaerys' view. So you have intelligent people on both sides of this debate. So let's start with that. Lady Gwyn, we'll start with you this time. Weigh in on this. Which do you think is wiser, and any other takes you have related to this?
Well, I think obviously they crystallize the 2 key things that you need in a Kingsguard. You need loyalty and you need military prowess. I do think that it's tough to say which was the right answer, but I think Jaehaerys was very clever. And he saw that, that what his mother was suggesting was problematic. Choosing someone based on a joust would be relatively pointless because knights aren't going to defend their king from horseback. And
oh no, he's riding right at the king with his lance.
Lance is out, fellas.
In the throne room, yeah.
So his solution of saying that it was going to have to be melees or duels in order to determine their actual prowess was a pretty good way of bridging that gap. I think they must have relied on their own personal judgment of people at that point, too, to make sure that they were also loyal. Right
on. Steven, what do you think?
I think it probably depends on the time and place. And in some ways, like Jaehaerys managed both, because a lot of the people maybe he just got lucky, but a lot of the people who won the tourney were nobodies, right? William the Wasp, Pate the Woodcock, Sam Good of Sour Hill, like people who didn't have any outside allegiances, owed everything to the king. And, as they saw at Dragonstone, like they were willing to in the midst of a major political conflict, side with the king at all costs. I guess, I don't know. So I had a couple of thoughts about the War of the White Cloaks. One of which is I thought the rejects were kind of more interesting than the people who won.
I agree.
Kagavale is great. Tom the Strummer, the Serpent in Scarlet. They're just a little bit more flavorful. I was also, this is just not just about this chapter, but in general, I was really surprised at like how little we get of Ryan Redwine in Fire and Blood Volume 1. Like, given that the guy is supposed to be one of the most like famous Kingsguard ever, a Lord Commander, a Hand of the King, this sort of like,
I said the same thing. I was like, top 5 minor nitpicks with Fire and Blood is why didn't Ryan Redwine get more screen time? But
and you'd think this would be a good place to have him come in, like maybe as sort of a kind of Barristan Selmy-esque, like too young for it, tries to sneak in anyway kind of thing. I don't know, maybe a missed trick, but overall it's like it's a very kind of capital R romantic, sort of set piece in what is probably the most like capital R romantic period of Targaryen history, like the period with the most pageantry, the most magnificence. It is the golden age from which the dance and everything that follows is kind of a fall from grace.
Golden age for a golden wedding sounds about right. Looks like the chat is doing having fun trying to pick out who young Griff's Kingsguard will be, and there's some good ideas. Obviously, they got Raleigh Duckfield on there. He's the first. I agree with the suggestion that Darkstar is a distinct possibility. Damon Sand is a possibility. I know it seems terrible to have him on there, but I could definitely see
Sand, it. I could see.
Yeah. And then they suggest a Hightower, not necessarily knowing which Hightower, but a Hightower. That would make a lot of sense.
If we're looking for parallels, the guy in the Golden Company, his name is Rings. Or no, Chains.
Chains, yeah.
Because one of the people who won the tourney was Lawrence Roxton. House Roxton's sigil is these like linked
the manacle things
chains.
Or whatever, yeah.
It's not manacles.
Oh, they're not manacles. There's chains. Okay.
They're just sort of ringed, sort of 2 strands of rings that are, technically 4 that are all linked together.
Well, that's a good catch. I definitely didn't see that. That's good.
So maybe that. I just was looking at the list of Kingsguard and it just
that's
popped
pretty cool. Yeah, I like that. Another thing that we have to bring up, which we briefly touched on when we talked about some of these things a couple weeks ago as well, was the Winged Knight event. They're going to choose these Winged Knights for Sir Robert Arryn, and it's the same kind of thing. You've got some people that are certainly qualified with the sword, but who are probably not a good idea to have behind your king. Obviously, Lyn Corbray, yeah. He's by far he's kind of like the same example of the Great John in blowing all the other possible examples out of the water with his blatancy there. But so that's yet another kind of side topic that relates to this as well.
And I have to imagine that the Mad Mouser is going to be at least a contestant.
Oh, yeah. I'm really curious how that's going to go. I expect him to fail, but it can't just be a complete falling on his face failure. I don't know.
I mean, I think he's going to fail in his ultimate objective of kidnapping Sansa.
Yeah.
But, like, I think it's sort of... All right. Chekhov's gun is not quite the right metaphor here, but like it's like when you see the little guy who like it's being teed up that like, oh, he's so little he can't really be a threat, and like then he judo flips some enormous dude, right? It's that kind of like necessary reversal, otherwise why have him be there, right? If like scrawny guy gets his head smashed in is not a news story. It's scrawny guy beats the bigger guy is the news story.
That I like that take. Also, so I wonder, I've been thinking about Pate the Woodcock, and I can't come up with a good parallel for him. Maybe this is as close as we get. A little guy that's supposedly that they didn't think he really belonged, but he proved himself.
I mean, he's a proto-dunk.
He is a proto-dunk, yes.
He's a proto-dunk in a Kingsguard that had a lot of proto-dunks.
Yes.
It's like Jeffrey Doggett is kind of close. What was the other? Sam Good of Sour Hill. Right?
Yeah.
Another guy that like...
Sam Good is Barristan
really
merged with Dunk, yeah. He's Barristan Dunk. with a smart mouth. I like that guy. So let's see here. You mentioned Tom the Strummer. That's a good one. He sings ribald songs aimed at his opponent, which is a nice parallel to Tom O'Sevens, who doesn't sing about his opponent so much as just Edmure and a few other people, but that's close enough. And Lady Gwyn, you said You like the keg of ale?
I like the keg of ale, and he reminded me of Dantos.
Mm-hmm.
A little soft spot for Sir Dantos. So.
I like that. Yeah, I agree.
And also a little bit of the what was his name? The guy who fought for Maegor, who like supposedly they cut him open and he was full of pies.
Oh yeah. What was that guy name? Was it Guy Lofton? Yeah.
Yeah.
Guy the Glutton. Yeah.
Right. Guy the Glutton. Right. So just sort of a little bit of a like folk history of food related nights.
Food nights. Yes, we should have the order of the food nights. That's what we need. So it's also mentioned here that Jaehaerys had what they are saying is the best Kingsguard of all time, or at least as good as the best Kingsguard of all time, which is neat to compare to Aerys, who had a really epic Kingsguard that also, of course, since this is a conversation wrapped up in Tower of Joy themes, that obviously relates with them being so loyal to Rhaegar and dying hard, as it were, because they're good fighters. We have. Did you guys have any comments on the comparison between these two Kingsguards, or is that just kind of a
yeah, thing? I mean I'm trying to remember the. I was getting my tourneys a little bit mixed up as I was reading this, and the one that kind of interesting parallels is the tourney at which Ryam Redwine. It was the like 50th anniversary one. And it was supposed to be like the greatest tourney ever, and that's sort of a good parallel for the tourney of Harrenhal, which is also supposed to be one of the biggest ones ever.
That makes sense.
What the hell was it?
I can't remember what that one was called either. Yeah, it was.
It was him and Clement Crabbe breaking 30 against each other.
Which I think probably needs. I this is just now occurring to me. There's probably a parallel to Dick Crabbe's stories in there somewhere about all those. Yeah. I'll have to look that up later. There's probably something there.
And they're also on like fairly, significant dates, right? This is the 50th year of King Jaehaerys' reign.
Yeah.
The tourney of Harrenhal was. Tourney at Harrenhal, was that also an anniversary one, or am I misremembering? No, I think I'm misremembering there.
Okay, we have another question here from Thomas Pappas, Hema Hellman. He says, really excited to hear you all discuss the parallels between the war for the White Cloaks and current events characters. The tournament itself Renly was of the best fighters school of thought, but Renly also seems like the kind of guy that just was very trusting,
It's also very much about, the pageantry and the show, and,
That's true.
As long as they're all...
And also sort of seeing what he could get from them, right? His whole thing about why he accepts Brienne's request is he says, well, the only thing she wants from me is to die in my service, so... That's okay by me. Yeah,
so he got both the best fighter and the most loyal. Yeah, that's also a little bit of getting lucky there, like Jaehaerys did, maybe. Okay, so we can move on here. Let me give the answer to our parallel lives question. The answer is Aenys Targaryen. Aenys also is indecisive and clever. His ill health also made him look older. It turned bad for him, particularly when he learned that his son and daughter were besieged in Craykall. He had a real collapse at that point, which I'm wary for what's going to happen to Doran Martell when he learns what happened to Quentyn. I don't think he's going to take it lightly. He's already in bad health, so that's a problem. I mentioned that they both faced rebellion and fled. Aenys fled to Dragonstone. Doran's rebellion wasn't armed rebellion. It was just people yelling in the streets, upset over the Red Viper's death, and he was worried it would turn into real rebellion, and that's why he seized the Sand Snakes. So he ran off to the Water Gardens, in a sense. So here's where a little foreshadowing comes in, because if we look at what happened to Aenys, we might get a sense of what's going to happen to Doran. When Aenys died, instead of the throne passing to his kids, it went to his brother. Now, I don't think that... Obviously, his brother is dead, so Oberyn's not going to take over. But Oberyn's kids, might take over. The Sand Snakes, with potentially Darkstar on their side, has been a long-running theory that I certainly think has a lot of validity to it. And, of course, it could also lead to Doran's death, potentially at the hands of his own family, which is maybe what happened to Aenys. We don't know. The fact that Visenya was taking care of him and Visenya wanted her own son to, well, yeah, you know where that's going. The incentive was pretty clear for Visenya, so...
Yeah, I was going to say, Doran should be very careful of any offers of medical assistance from the Sand Snakes.
And we already had that foreshadowed, right? When his maester checks him to see if any little cuts, or when he touched, was it Tyene?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's let you guys weigh in on potential for Doran, mostly the foreshadowing aspects of this, but if you have other things you want to say about Aenys and Doran Martell, feel free. Lady Gwyn, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the foreshadowing aspect could certainly be a thing. I'm concerned about the balance of power down there with the Oberyn's daughters in that situation. So I don't really have anything else to add. It's just, that's definitely a thing that I'm keeping my eyes on.
Hotop in big trouble, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. What about you, Stephen? What do you think about all this?
I don't know. It's a little tricky to me because it depends on how the situation with Aegon plays out in relation to Doran's plot. Because, like, in some ways, he is the very manifestation of what Doran wants. Like, one situation where I could see this happening is, like, we already know from the advanced chapters that, like, Doran is very suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the difficulty for him might be that, like, if he backs out now, right? Let's say Aerion goes ahead and commits herself. If he backs out now, it's very hard to make the argument, right? You know, that this guy is like, you know, because you think the sort of the romantic nationalistic side of it is like, this is the murdered half Martell prince come back from the dead, and you're gonna say no after your daughter says yes. You know, I could see claims that, you know, he's a traitor, or, you know, what have you. I don't know, it's a little bit confusing because, you know, Obara is like off, like she's nowhere near Sunstone. You know, several of the Sand Snakes are like headed up to King's Landing. So
yeah, and they're going to and they're supposed to take a job in a regime that is about to be overthrown potentially. So yeah, it is kind of, there's a lot of forks in the road here.
Yeah, it's more than just like, you don't see them gathering for a coup attempt.
Yeah.
So like, if it happens, like, I got to feel like it's more of a sort of like unexpected lone gunman thing than like a concerted coup.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense to me. Let's see here. Actually, one more parallel I want to throw out. So you can see another mention here that something they have in common, Aenys and Doran, is just kind of being a little slow with their plans, right? Like being maybe too patient. Like some people think of Doran as patient, but I think the fandom over time has sort of turned on him and like, that wasn't patience. That was, I mean, it was patience and other things. It was dallying. It was maybe too slow. You know, it was, patience is a good thing, but that there's patience and then there's missing your chance. And there's an argument that maybe Doran never had a chance, but there's also an argument that he had a chance and let it slip by. So anyway, that's a whole nother topic. Well, we're at the halfway point, so I think we're doing pretty well on time. I think we're going to get to cover everything we set out to cover, but again, I won't promise. A couple of super chats. These are slightly off topic, but that's all good. We'll answer them. We have from Fred Targaryen's Uncle Daddy, great name. All hail Sarah Targaryen, hoes before bros. Okay, now that's the take I didn't expect to see. Not the hoes before bros, but all hail Sarah Targaryen, because Sarah. Not a good kid. Not a good kid. I tweeted for fun the other day an out of context quote from Fire and Blood, which was ... they had never seen a child who sucked so hard, which is just wonderful out of context because you can throw that at Joffrey or Sweet Robin or, I don't know, Ollie if you really are feeling spicy. But Sarah, you could throw that one at Sarah too. That is a child who sucked pretty hard.
Yep.
And Marvin the Martian, follows that up with, speaking of Sarah, Daddy gave her every pet she asked for. Why didn't Sarah ask for a dragon hatchling? Would have been smart in retrospect. Yeah, that is a little puzzling because she ran off to try to grab a dragon after she was punished. And yeah, why didn't she have one before? She was way past the age where they normally have dragons, and she, being the kind of person she was, I don't know. I honestly don't have a good answer for that. I don't know why she didn't. Do you guys have any takes on that, or is it maybe just does it not make sense to you either? It kind of doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, this was something I was talking with Good Queen Allie about, that like the whole tradition of Targaryens having an egg in their cradle or being bonded with a hatchling seems very hit or miss in the Jaehaerian period, which is strange because this is supposedly the period in which they have the most dragons. So, you got to get these things paired off, otherwise they start running wild. Like, what was the plan here exactly?
Or someone hitches a ride to Valyria. You never know, right? Yeah. These things, it's true. Yeah, I guess, and it was to be nice, to charitable to Jaehaerys and Alysanne. They were kind of they were trotting on untrod ground. Like, what are they supposed to do with all these dragons? Like, it's not like a policy that they necessarily could fall back on pre-existing to their time. Like, well, let's just do what Aegon did. Well, what did Aegon do? He probably didn't have some of this stuff is kind of not explained. Like, we have these dragon keepers and these official dudes on Dragonstone who kind of watch it over, but we're not given a whole lot of logistics on that. It's just, we're told it exists, but there's not a lot of mechanism explained, which is fine. We didn't necessarily need that. It would have been cool, but it's not a big loss.
They had a lot of kids too, a lot more kids than anyone else previous to them.
That
and Sarah
is also
was
a good point.
Pretty far down the line of kids, so who knows? I think George just didn't want her to have a dragon.
Yeah.
That would have complicated the story.
I also think that's why he had so many of those kids die off, because boy, like, the dynasty would have just been so hard to write.
What the hell do I do with all these?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, y'all are going to be tragic figures by the end, because these kids got to die.
They're all going to go.
Yeah. Okay, a little mid-roll action real quick, and then we'll get back to it. We'll talk a little bit about Rogar, and then we'll talk about the actual Tower of Joy, Proto Tower of Joy event itself. So, let's see. Let's give thanks to our Blood Rider patrons. That's Vorsaki, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Arak with the Dragonbone hilt. Kohel Koi, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a Dragonbone bow. And Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of the Wildfire Whip Gehenna. And also, thanks to our sellsword captains. That would include Peter Blaze of the Emerald Isle, captain of the Werewood Wanderers, to long lives, quick deaths, cold beer, and warm women. Daegron, marshal of the Axe, captain of the Red Tide. Resistance is futile. Kyron Carlsbane, captain of the Stone Shields, the torrent breaks upon the stone. Haema Helminth, captain of the Whispering Children, dead men tell no secrets. Shepard, the shepherd of Essos, all men are sheep before the Shepard, heir to the Whispering Children. Lady Lajara Dajo, the Iron Lily, master archer, castellan of the Summer Island Keep, Arboreal Point, captain of the all-female Wailing Widows, women and children first. Cody the Crimson is bastard of Bracken, captain of the Red Waste Exiles and recruiter of the Free Folk. Cameron, the Hammer of Hornwood, is captain of the English Lions with the motto, honor is the reward of virtue. Lord Brandon Brewer of Castle Blackroon, captain of the Shadow Wolves, our steel is cold, our vengeance colder. Black Alex Sand, the bastard of Spears, leader of the Bermuda Vanguard. And last but not least, Al Iskander of Yt, captain of the Blazing Sabers. Do not go gently into this long night. I had a little fun with the patron names over the weekend. I got a wild hair and decided to read every patron name at the end of the Gogossus bonus episode. It took 25 minutes. There's several hundred names I read. Some of them are very long. So, and then I said to myself, oh, now I have to go back and edit that. Damn. But it was fun. It was fun to read all those names out loud. So anyone who gets the Gogossos episode, I apologize if you were hoping the last 20 minutes was more content, but it's really just me reading all those names. So, I know a lot of you like hearing me read those names, so hopefully you particularly like this. But let's go ahead. Let's move on. Yeah. So yeah, if you are, I see people commenting about Gogossos. Yeah, it's going to be Gogossos will be up for all patrons by next week. So it's following the normal pattern of 7-day advance, then 5-day advance, then 2-day advance. So we have, our Patreon's a little complicated sometimes, but it does the job. Okay. Yeah. Let's get back to it. Thanks to Taryn the Black, super chat at the gym, listening. Keep up the great work. I love that people get to do chores and exercise while hanging out with us. It's one of the great things about podcast and audio entertainment. Getting your chores and things out of the way, getting tedious things taken care of while having something to entertain you. It's one of the things that got me into podcasting. It's what I love about podcasting when I was just a listener myself. Okay. Rogar, Baratheon, great guy. Not interesting guy. No, he's not. He's an interesting person. I've struggled to come up with parallels for him. I don't think there's great ones. He's a mishmash of different characters. There's a little bit of Tywin in him, a little bit of Mace Tyrell. So we don't have to try to parallel life every character. So we don't have to force this.
No small amount of Robert.
Yes, Rob. Yeah, of course, being a Baratheon, he's got the bluster and the I'll fight anybody type attitude, the never backing down attitude. So yeah, there's a lot of Robert in him for sure. But do you guys see any other parallels there with him? Was I maybe missing something, or did you kind of see him similarly?
Yeah, similar, definitely.
Okay, cool.
Bit of Robert.
A good thing to keep in mind is that all these great houses probably had more pride at this point in time than they maybe do now, with some exceptions because some of the great houses have since risen even higher than they were. But at this time, they're all 50, 60 years removed from being independent and having been independent and in charge of their own kingdom for huge amounts of time, like uncountable amounts of time. So it's mentioned that Rogar is really proud. He's grandson of Orys Baratheon and the last Storm King, that's some good blood, by Westerosi standards, no doubt. And his family is big. He's himself big. He marries Alyssa. The regent marrying the hand is kind of a problem, isn't it? That can cause some issues. What do you guys think about that? And are there any similar situations that you can kind of compare this to? Real world or Westeros?
So the parallel that stuck out to me, just sort of running through most of the story of Rogar, is the way that Edward the Third dealt with his mother Isabella and Roger Mortimer. And Rogar and Roger are fairly close in that, they were romantically linked, which sort of embarrassed the king because of what happened to his father, although those situations are sort of somewhat similar, but not completely, because Isabella overthrew Edward II and Alyssa did not overthrow her own husband. But in terms of the sort of this slightly Freudian undertone of the conflict between him and between Jaehaerys and Rogar, in that, like, he's very much seeing him as, like, you're not my real dad. And also that sort of like overweening pride that, like, the Mortimers were this, astoundingly wealthy family, to the point where like they were a major reason why the Yorkists, like the House of York, became a thing, is that they had an inheritance from the Mortimers.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
So they provided most of the money and the land.
And we know George knows all this stuff. This is absolutely in his own, like, hobbyist wheelhouse of stuff he'd like to read about. So yeah,
some of his major influences. Jaehaerys becomes a king in his minority, just like Edward III. And I wonder, originally, didn't he refer to Rogar as Robar?
He did. He decided to change his mind. Yeah, he was like, he flip flopped and then went back and was like, yeah, Rogar's better.
I hadn't really thought about it in light of that. So
because it's Roger Mortimer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, very good catch. Yeah, that seems like almost a slam dunk.
Also, Roger Mortimer didn't end out very well when Edward III came to power, although, Rogar gets a lot luckier than Mortimer.
Yeah, there's more conciliation in the Westeros version. So
a lot less gallows.
Yeah. Rogar did not hang. He got to die of old age. So Rogar, he is also one of the most important figures in sort of maybe not establishing male primogeniture, but sort of, I guess establishing, sort of cementing it. It wasn't fully cemented because of him, but he really pushed it. And before him, it was kind of dodged. Because it could have gone to Rhaena was technically the eldest child of Aenys, who was the king, but Rhaena married Aegon the Uncrowned. So they kind of dodged the issue by just having the royal couple be the two oldest. So it wasn't really one wasn't really passed over. They're both going to be king and queen. But then Maegor did his thing and they didn't get to rule. So then so they kind of got to avoid that issue by Maegor taking over. Now it came back because they're like, hey, well, why isn't Rhaena queen? And Rogar's like, a woman? This kind of thing where Rogar is just constantly like, a woman. He calls people, refers to them by that name. And yeah, he's very much on the Andal side of things, not the Valyrian side of things, it seems, from his heritage. And the whatever, just the male side of things. And he says, this is not Dorne and Rhaena is not Nymeria. I think that's a pretty telling quote.
and I think the other thing is that, if it really had come down to a political struggle between them, like, they're both dragon riders. Okay. But like Jaehaerys is just so much better at politics.
Yeah.
And the thing that like got to me with Rhaena is that like initially she really didn't want it, or at least didn't seem to be making any moves to like, because she had, the sort of the supporters of, Prince Aegon's rebellion kind of close to her. She had a kind of a following, but she didn't really follow up with them. She just sort of hung out. And I mean, honestly, I think her biggest mistake, politically speaking, was marrying a second son of the Farmans.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to make an issue of your claim, that is the wrong move, and it delayed any claim rather significantly.
She's kind of like, it's the thing that Stannis wrestled with in his head that he finally got over. He was thinking of his rights before his duty, and eventually he got straight on that. But Rhaena, she was very much about her rights, and you're right. Like, she was called up her rights on things that she didn't even necessarily want. She was just kind of.
I wonder whether instead of like rights versus duties, it's like rights versus, I don't know, trauma in a way. Like, it seemed like she had two things that she wanted simultaneously. She wanted the things that she had been taken away from her, but she also wanted to retreat.
Yes.
Like, she wanted to be with her favorites. She wanted to be in a place that she had good mental associations with. But those two things are in competition.
Yeah.
All right. The more you do one, the less you can do the other. And I don't think she ever really made up her mind in time as to which way to go.
Yeah. She's a really interesting character, and we're going to focus on her fully in another episode. So let's not go too deep on the Rhaena rabbit hole here, but it relates really strongly to Rogar, because Rhaena hated Rogar, it seems, and she has plenty of good reasons to. Some of the things she accused him of, were maybe a little unfair, but she had plenty of fair complaints about his behavior, many fair complaints about his behavior. And and of course, partly because Rogar is a hypocrite about a lot of things. And Lady Gwyn, you've got some notes here, so let's hear from you here for a minute.
Oh yeah, number one, file this under hypocrisy. He does not think Rhaena should inherit, and yet, in very short order, we'll see him, when it suits him, looking to Rhaena's claim and her daughters when he starts to think maybe Jaehaerys isn't the way to go, because Jaehaerys is challenging his own power. So it's very, and it's not like he waited years for that change of heart. It's kind of follows right quickly on. So
yeah, I have to say I lost a lot of respect between World of Ice and Fire and Fire and Blood.
Yeah, he seemed okay back then. Yeah,
because he just seems just less clever and sort of directed at his goals. Like, okay, not getting to marry Jaehaerys and Alysanne, Alysanne the way he wanted. That's a setback. But like, okay, you've still got relatives around. They're going to have kids. Why not work something out down the like? What astonishes me is he goes from like 0 to rebellion and nothing flat.
Yeah.
And doesn't even take the time to like, as I usually say, like you pre-meeting the meeting, right? You don't just sort of say like, I'm going to rebel against the king. Who's with me? You
and they're like,
take
nobody.
each person aside ahead of time and sound them out in vague hypotheticals.
Yeah.
And then you decide like, are you going to go ahead with this? And it's just like, I don't know. His whole thing kind of ends with such a whimper, not a bang.
Yeah, that's why the mace thing comes up.
Yeah,
that's because he's full of hot air. He talks about how he would have fought Maegor, but would he have really?
Yeah, it made me kind of wonder, like, just why not have him die fighting the Vulture King? Like,
I kind of wanted that too.
Send him off in like and end his story, but instead it just kind of like keeps going. He's he's still there. He's not dead yet.
Yeah.
And especially like, I don't know if you want to get into this, but like the way that Alyssa's story ends is just kind of really kind of grim.
Yeah.
And like this is something since we touched on the Golden Wedding, like I don't feel that Alyssa's character is particularly consistent in Fire and Blood.
I wish it had been a little more fleshed out.
Like, on the one hand, we're told that like she just wants to be loved, and that was her, sort of Viserys-like kind of quality. But I'm like, this is the same woman who wanted to like purge and execute all of Maegor's followers. That doesn't seem like the same person to me.
Yeah.
Right.
And likewise, like when she's dies through childbirth, I was sort of thinking in my head like, okay, but she's an intelligent, experienced woman. She knows that Tansy tea exists. Like, why not use it?
And Rogar doesn't even have to find out, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why is it
on the sly? Yeah,
sort of birth control is like simultaneously there but not there? An element of world building. I don't know.
It's a good point. I didn't think of that option for her. That's a very good point. So, Lady Gwyn, you have some notes here on Alyssa as well, as far as she understood Jaehaerys, her children. She understood what they would do. But it's maybe fair in retro. Now, we know it worked out, but at the time, it may have been fair for Rogar and Alyssa, etc., to be worried about Jaehaerys and Alysanne getting married because of the shadow of the faith hanging over them and the way that people believe at that time.
Yep. Absolutely. And she's got this memory of what happened with Aegon and Rhaena. And in spite of the fact that she kind of sees the inevitability of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, she's just terrified of history repeating itself. So she gets on board with this planning marriage alliances separately for both the children, behind their backs, because her heart's in the right place. She wants to prevent this,
Yeah.
So, I don't fault her for that as a mother. She thinks she's doing the right thing for her kids. So
yeah, and she has the right. She handles it much better than Rogar. We'll get to we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but Rogar's problem was that when everything was against him, when justice was no longer on his side, he still persisted. Partly, it seems because of pride. Like his pride and his sense of justice were aligned, and when the justice part fell off, he didn't really realize it. He kind of kept going. He's a guy that doesn't know how to give up. Alyssa, as we'll see, knew when to throw in the towel. She's like, wait, if we don't stop this, it's going to become bloody. So let's explore this here. We have a couple different names for this: Tower of Joy 1.0, the new old Tower of Joy, the Proto Tower of Joy, or the Pro Tower of Joy. There's a lot of good names for it here. And a few people, when I posted this name, were wondering what on earth I was talking about. But I think as we go through this section, you'll see that, wow, there are a lot of Tower of Joy parallels to Jaehaerys and Alysanne running off to get married, I hesitate to say without permission, because, well, they're the king and the queen, but sort of they didn't have permission. That's kind of a thorny issue, but we'll get into that. So let's start with some of the basic similarities. Jaehaerys' Kingsguard being super loyal to him instead of to the regent, which is a major contrast to what we'll see later with Aegon III, where the regent is kind of actively against the king instead of just kind of arguing with him. Aegon III is almost assassinated, where Rogar never goes that far. And that's similar with Rhaegar and Aerys with regards to the three at the Tower of Joy. Now, there's, of course, some major differences, but which we will point out as well. But there's also some major similarities. Here's one major difference here, Lady Gwyn, that you had pointed out.
Yeah, the major difference is that Jaehaerys, you could say, has full control over this Kingsguard. He's got all 7, and there's no conflict for them. There's not going to be somebody else in the background giving them a conflicting order, unlike Rhaegar, who had his 3 at the Tower of Joy. But, it's debatable whether the king could have tried to call them back, and what then would have happened. What would their conflict have been?
Yeah, like with Aegon III, when the Kingsguard were kind of not following the king's orders. Yeah. Aegon III's like, get the heck out of here, and the Kingsguard's like, no, we're coming for you. So it's quite different. And then, and of course, another major difference is there's no polygamy at issue here. It's not Jaehaerys and Alysanne aren't trying to get married twice, which is the potential issue with Rhaegar, but it's still the same issue as far as how it's viewed by the religion, the dominant religion. The faith hate incest pretty much as they hate polygamy. They've learned to accept incest sort of in current times. And we don't really have polygamy in current times, so we don't really know what they think of it. Probably not good. They probably aren't like, okay, yeah, sure, go ahead. Especially with the High Sparrow just now coming in charge, who is not likely to be soft on such issues, shall we say. Mm-hmm. So start with here. Stephen, let's get your takes on some of the basic, just overarching similarities between Jaehaerys and Alysanne's standoff and Rhaegar and Lyanna.
One thing that's kind of clear from a sort of, again, a metatextual standpoint is this very much about romanticism.
Yeah.
Right? The Tower of Joy is sort of the bittersweet, slightly gothic side of it, right? Where it's like it all ends in tragedy and, the roses fade and, all is lost. Whereas, this is like the shining example, right? This is like, oh, it all works out, right? Knights do what they're supposed to and no one dies and the people who are in love actually get to marry and like people aren't as upset with them as we thought they were going to be, and yay. No wonder the song became so popular.
Yeah.
So I sort of see them as like mirror opposites. It's like in some ways the Tower of Joy is what might have happened if it had come to swords at Dragonstone. Mm-hmm. Because, as I've sort of said before with reference to like Ned's attempted coup in the throne room, like when you have a lot of powerful people and swords in close quarters, anything can happen. It can all go wrong very, very badly.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, we have no king because someone accidentally stabbed him. Shit. And the hand's dead. And now what are we going to do? It's like...
and now people want revenge. Yeah.
It all goes for one side or the other. Like it can wind up like a, like the aftermath of a shootout in a gangster movie where it's like, oh, everyone's dead. Well, crap.
Yeah. So, Lady Gwyn, Alyssa says when she finds out, okay, so let me back up just a little bit. Jaehaerys and Alysanne go off in secret after Alysanne approaches Jaehaerys and says, hey, they're going to try to marry me off to, I've forgotten to who, but Jaehaerys says, who's that?
The Baratheon.
Oh yeah, the Baratheon sister or son of his brother, one of his brothers. Yeah, Ronald or Garen, one of those guys, or Boris. Yeah, Oren, one of those guys.
Orton.
It doesn't happen, so it's not super important. And Jaehaerys says, "Oh, well, clearly, if they're going to marry you off, they're going to marry me off. So let's." So that he orders his Kingsguard to leave with him. They fly, not with him. They go on their own, and Jaehaerys and Alysanne fly to Dragonstone. Something that Rhaegar and Lyanna did not have an option to do. And they find out, the court finds out Alyssa and Rogar get some men together and confront them. And there's kind of a standoff. where they're facing each other and kind of arguing about this whole issue. And Alyssa says, "You foolish children, you know not what you've done." And boy, does that sound like Lyanna and Rhaegar. You know, that is absolutely like, what have you done? You've caused this rift, etc. So Lady Gwyn, tell us what you think about all that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the fear is that they've brought a whole new episode of violence and bloodshed on the realm. Obviously, that is the thought around Rhaegar and Lyanna. I thought it was interesting that Jaehaerys, as far as the parallel goes, that the Jaehaerys and Alysanne parallel is very close on the timeline to the two best known examples of Targaryen polygamy. So in light of what happens after and how this situation is solved, I think that's a significant precedent. I think we'll see that. I think you alluded to this a few minutes ago, that polygamy, incest, I think kind of at this point are probably equally evil for the faith. You know, it seems to have changed a little bit over the generations. But
yeah, they still sort of tolerate the Targaryens do it, even though they seem to have backed off on doing it as often. But Jaime and Cersei talk about it, and they're like, It's people. They're clear. Well, Jaime wants to do it, but despite what people will think, but Cersei's like, "Are you crazy?" Even Cersei's like, "No."
Yeah,
I will say it gives more grounding to the idea of like the doctrine of exceptionalism.
Yes,
which is like if the way that the faith got its head around the whole thing was saying, "Okay, this one family gets to do it and no one else," then you can sort of say, well, like, oh, well, then it's completely nuts for, you know, Jaime to just say, like, well, the Targs did it, so can we? Because no one's going to agree to that. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Well, obviously you're not. Yeah, we've made this exception just for them. You're not them.
I mean, one example in the book, right, where the one hedge knight says to that one septon, "Hey, can I, are you telling me I can go bang my sister?" And he's like, "Well, if you can go ride a dragon, then I'll marry you myself, marry themselves." That's kind of like Jaime. They're like, "Hey, can I go bang my sister?" And the Septon's like, "Well, can you ride a dragon?" Go ahead and marry Cersei if you can ride a dragon. So
show me your dragon.
Yeah, show me the dragon. There's the logistics behind this as well. It was fairly easy for Jaehaerys and Alysanne to get married because they had a loyal old septon who had lived on Dragonstone the whole time. They knew him personally. He was kind of a mild-mannered guy. And again, this is the king, not the prince. So they, there's no one that is like, oh, well, if the king isn't okay with this, I could be executed. No, this is the king, so you're probably fine. But with Rhaegar and Lyanna, who married them? Who did this ceremony? That's potentially another witness to the event. And that is by itself is a huge topic.
Let's just hope it's handled a little bit more gracefully than last season.
Yes, I agree. I definitely hope it's done better than on TV. But TV at least raised a few interesting questions. And one of the questions it raises, as well as the whole point of this Tower of Joy episode in Fire and Blood, is that George has told us about the Tower of Joy already, but it's barely fleshed out in terms of the casual reader and in terms of any sort of resolution. Tower of Joy is coming back in one way or another, either Bran or Howland Reed or Willa the wet nurse or somebody, Shara Dane, I don't know. There's people out there who know, and they haven't weighed in yet, and they're gonna. And that's why George has to work all this out, because it's still to come in the series. Even though he's got these ideas, they haven't been fully fleshed out. So I think that this episode with Jaehaerys and Alysanne, like a lot of Fire and Blood, is him working out these ideas for the main series. One of the big things that George is weighing in on here is the aspect of there being witnesses to this marriage, which is for Rhaegar and Lyanna, there's less. Ashea has some art here she's going to put up. This is from Fire and Blood by Doug Wheatley, and it's a pretty cool shot. Let's talk about the that aspect of this, the aspect of witnesses, and how that might play out in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, it's going to be very hard to undo a marriage that's been witnessed by so many people, even though, consummation notwithstanding, say as soon as Jaehaerys, in this case, chooses to let people know, pretty much the cat's out of the bag, and it's going to be very difficult. And, Rogar and Alyssa are keenly aware of that fact.
Yeah, it's interesting that Rogar even tries. He tries to keep the whole marriage a secret, but
I love when he when he tried to stop the old Septon from sending the ravens to Old Town, and he's just trying to. I could picture him running around. No, don't tell anyone.
Yeah, that was the part that really, again, losing respect for Rogar is how did you think word's not going to get out?
Yeah.
And even if no word gets out, people are going to notice that the king's not around.
Yeah, where's the king, by the way?
This is a political structure in which everything is about the physical proximity to the body of the king. If the king ain't there, you could only say he's on vacation for so long. Before people, I'm really surprised that we didn't get more people saying Rogar's killed the king because he wants to replace him with his own child with Alyssa or some conspiracy theory like that. So I'm not exactly sure how the whole cover up thing was ever really going to pan out.
But it's interesting as a parallel to the Tower of Joy being this secret thing that happened with Rhaegar and Lyanna. So that at least
I definitely think that if there was a Septon involved, then the only option is going to be some local dude, a little bit more like Tyrion and Tysha, not the High Septon.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite possible it's actually somebody at the Isle of Faces.
Ooh, that would be cool.
Because there's been this whole thing about marriage in front of the old gods and marriage in front of the new gods, and to what extent one views the other as legitimate and binding. I mean, this has come up in relation to Sansa. It's definitely a possibility with Rhaegar and Lyanna as well.
I think Chloe had a great note she left us here that says that the dragons are the closest things to godlike creatures in Westeros or in Planetos right now, other than potential actual gods. And so, in a sense, Dragonstone is roughly a parallel to the Isle of Faces for Rhaegar and Lyanna. It's the closest thing we have anyway.
I mean, it's definitely a magical location. It's one of the because it's volcanic, it's connected to the what is the thing that Melisandre calls them? The
hinges of the world or whatever.
Well, but also that Winterfell, because it's on hot springs. Right, it's connected to these fires under the ground, which make it connected to fire magic, and whereas the Isle of Faces is very much that's earth magic, and it's the children of the forest, and it's the heart trees, and green seers and the green men and all that stuff.
One of the other really important aspects of having witnesses to the wedding is that it reminds us again that to Tower of Joy there were more people. Ned just remembers the 7 and the 3 and Lyanna, but that's almost certainly not the case. Even TV showed that there were some other people hanging around, and that's obviously almost certainly 99.9% accurate. Not necessarily the exact people.
It's there in the books too, because when Ned talks
they.
about exactly, he uses the plural to describe being pulled away, and
you're right.
I think there's certain they that we can guess, right? Wyla probably, because a wet nurse might also be a midwife.
Maybe a squire, probably not.
Servants, right? These are all nobles. They're not going to hang out in some tower in the middle of nowhere, because none of them know how to cook, none of them know how to clean.
A knight can't even put his armor on without a squire. Let's face it.
Yeah.
You guys are,
Is the White Bull helping Arthur Dane get dressed?
I mean, each other dressed. No, it's squires.
I don't think Wyla's lifting up the White Bull's breastplate. It's probably that. This thing is probably heavy as hell, right?
I think, and they're not taking care of their own horses or.
Yeah, all true. Yeah, so this is one of the strongest, most important parts of the parallel, I think, is George saying, look, because he puts it in there multiple times. He says he makes it very clear there were lots of witnesses to this wedding. And then he puts a footnote in there just to say, look, the singers love to sing about this event and show that it was just the Kingsguard standing off versus all of Rogar's men. But really, there were archers and garrison.
Let me shine the spotlight on all those other people there.
Check out the supporting cast, who are always present in situations like this.
And they'll be there when you need them to speak up about what happened. And notably, we've never been anywhere in that, in the Red Mountains, anywhere remotely near that area in anybody's point of view so far in A Song of Ice and Fire. So we haven't had any opportunity for people like that to pop up. Although there's a lot of theories in the fandom about who might have been obviously a wet nurse or who might have been a squire or whatnot.
Yeah, lots of endless debates there.
Fun squire theories and stuff.
Yeah. We get a few somewhat similar pieces of dialogue. Just great dialogue, whether or not you believe it's a parallel or not. But when Sir Gerald says, "But not of the Kingsguard. The Kingsguard does not flee," it kind of reminds me of Sour Sam saying, "We're the Kingsguard, not the Handsguard," which is I love that line so much. And they have the line that I think it's Oswell Went says, "Oh, those guys would be dead if they faced us." And that's kind of what Pate says to Rogar. He's like, "Yeah, we might die, but you're going down first." Like, it's a really, really badassery on point here. I love it. Mm-hmm. So let's see here. This is where, I actually pulled a quote here. "All these tellings overlook the presence of the castle garrison, but to suggest the King's Seven stood alone mayhaps presumes too much." So yeah, that's the relevant line there. So we have an establishment, a few other things that come out of this, that Alysanne and I'll just read the quote here. "Alysanne establishes part of his council from this point on. Aegon had no secrets from Rhaenys and Visenya, and I have none from Alysanne." That's what Jaehaerys says. I wonder if that's something that's relevant to the modern story, whether young Griff, whoever he marries, is going to make proclamations like this to shore up the alliances to Dorne or whoever, or to the Tyrells potentially. So let's move forward here. Now, you have some notes here, Lady Gwyn, on the Corian Wild plot, which I wonder if that's... I don't know what to make of that. I don't know if it's relevant or not, but we can talk about it for a minute anyway. So go ahead here.
Well, I thought it was relevant in that poor Rogar. He just, he's floundering around trying to figure out how to solve this problem that's been created, and he comes up with allegedly this Corian Wild, who was a disgraced young noblewoman from the Stormlands. She had been sullied, had a bastard that was being fostered in the Baratheon household. And allegedly, he hand-selected her to go be a companion to Alysanne. The story was with the intent to seduce Jaehaerys, right? So did he really intend for that to happen? Did he groom her, which was... I think this the whole dialogue in Fire and Blood about A Caution for Young Girls, the book, and all the different versions of the book came after, I found hilarious.
There's also a neat commentary on how history is written, because it's these the highfalutin historians and scribes wouldn't touch it, so you get this different.
But then but like any history, it starts out with a caution for young girls, and it becomes what were I can't remember some of the other names, but
the Book of Lust and
it's just like a game of telephone at the end.
So the weird thing to me was, okay. I think there's one whole side, which is why spend all of this time on what is, at the end of the day, a fairly distasteful side story, right? It's a story about a non-event because this plan doesn't work.
Yeah.
The other thing, and this is where my historian's side comes more to the fore, is all of this stuff about this sort of slightly pornographic fiction novel that ends with, someone repenting, right? Pornography disguised as moralizing, essentially. that has a real historical foundation. It's called the picaresque novel. It's a whole genre. Think things like Moll Flanders, Vanity Fair, etc. The problem is that genre of books really couldn't exist without the printing press. That, you know, you're talking about a society in which like 90+% of the population are illiterate. You know, books have to be copied by hand. And I actually at one point on Tumblr like sat down and did the math. And I was like, it would take months and months and months and months and months to produce one copy. But to have hundreds, if not thousands of copies of a theoretically banned book floating around seems unlikely. Like, it's the kind of thing that you can do if you have an underground press. Like, because you only have to like squat in some, you know, rented house for a week to like print out, you know, a couple dozen copies, then you move on.
I think what we're realizing is this is evidence of some kind of incomancy, some sort of magical printing press is happening underground.
Yeah, like, well, I think it's more just like, you know, George R. R. Martin sometimes has problems with math. Like, if there were maybe, you know,
tough but fair,
a dozen, you know, or something like that, like you might expect that. Like, it's not like you didn't see this. I mean, I think the most sort of prevalent pre-printing press version I can think of is something like Boccaccio's Decameron, right? Although that involved a fair amount of like, you know, even though it was sort of naughty literature, there was a certain amount of like elite sponsorship, right? It was a book that like, you know, well-educated men of the world would own a copy. They might, you know, they might keep it under lock and key so that their wife didn't find it, but it was something that was around. Whereas, you know, I just don't think in the particular world that Martin has set up that you'd quite see this phenomenon.
I think that's a fair criticism. We got a super chat we should answer. It's a little bit related to it's very related to the original Tower of Joy. Given Rhaegar's, this is from, whose question is this from? This is from, Marvin Martian. Given Rhaegar's smarts, was declaring Lyanna queen at the tourney and the issues it would cause part of some larger plan or prophecy, or was he just, this is me adding on to the question, or was he just, you know, thinking with his balls or something, or was it, or was he just maybe not as smart as people think he is, or something like that? What do you guys think about Rhaegar's declaration? Was it a plan, or just kind of an emotional thing, or what?
I'm always of the opinion that he declared her impulsively as a reward to her because he knew she was the Knight of the Laughing Tree. He discovered her identity, and in his, you know, kind of desire to recognize her for that, he miscalculated. So I guess I kind of fall on the Rhaegar's wasn't as smart as in this instance. I don't think he wasn't as smart as he was across the table, or, you know, but
yeah, certainly less sort of consistently politically minded. I think that's the thing. It's like Rhaegar had a certain amount of interest in politics, but like the prophecy was the thing that came first.
Yeah. Whereas
Jaehaerys seems to be very much a person of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's almost nothing about him talking magic, really. There's a couple of tidbits, but we'll talk about that some other time. That would be very far off topic right now. So let's see. Let's think about this for a second. Earlier, I mentioned Alyssa and how she was sort of a peacemaker, and this is something you touched on as well, Lady Gwyn, where you have these over prideful, quick to fight characters, and you have a standoff like this. It's almost always going to result in blood. But Alyssa and her authority of regent was able to say no. Just say, okay, this ends now. We're not going to fight. Oh, now it ends. Aha! I didn't do that on purpose, but my shirt has a perfect quote here.
I almost heard that too.
That would have been funny.
Twinsies. There was another one too, as we were talking. It was the actual Baratheon betrothed. Alysanne was supposed to be betrothed to this Baratheon guy. Oh
yeah, of course. Which is Lyanna to Robert. Geez, I missed that one. That's really obvious. Good call.
Yeah.
And of course, well, actually, Steven, did you have anything to say about that?
No, I think you've got it all. I'm gonna save my powder for the Doctrine of Exceptionalism.
Okay, cool. All right, so one other parallel for the Tower of Joy, then we're going to do our other parallel lives and answer a question, and then we'll move on to the Doctrine of Exceptionalism, minus any other lingering questions we have for the Tower of Joy. Yeah, that last parallel would be one of the reasons they called it the Tower of Joy. That's a nickname Rhaegar gave it. It wasn't like its official title. And the reason they called it that is they got to live there for a while. They had like a slice of living out their romance without the problems of the world. And before it all went horribly downhill. But they did have a time of happiness and joy, which Jaehaerys and Alysanne got that too, but it was after this incident. They had their showdown, and because Alyssa and cooler heads prevailed, they got to go off and be a couple. Whereas the showdown was, well, by the time the showdown happened at the Tower of Joy, Rhaegar was already dead. So there was no chance of anything, a happy ending at that point for them. But that's kind of another part of this story that lines up in a sense, kind of in a mirror image way. Okay, so let's do a parallel lives, and while people are thinking about the answer, we've got a couple of questions to answer. So, okay, this time, let's think about two characters that have a lot in common. And let's see here. Let's start with this factoid. They're both raised among the commoners, but know they're princes. One shaves his head, the other dyes his hair. They both wear straw hats. They have very similar descriptions of their eyes. Here's one that's a clue that's hard to give without kind of giving the whole thing away. They both have a main protector who has 4 letters in his name, is a knight with 3 of the 4 letters are the same. And both of those protectors got in trouble for attacking someone who was much more powerful, of greater blood than them, and got in big trouble for it. Also, these two could have a similar death, but one of them is still alive. So let's answer these questions while you guys ponder the answer to that, and we'll come back with the answer and a fuller explanation. Okay, so this question we have, well, here's not a question, from Little Hammer, Super Chat. I heart you guys. Hi, Aziz and Ashay, and your pet kitten, if he still exists. We have, well, he's not a kitten anymore because he's a cat, but we have 5 cats, and we haven't lost any cats, so we have all our cats still. They're doing very well. And so far, they haven't wandered by the camera, but often they do. As for a question from Thomas Pappas, hey, Mahelminth, I'm curious as to whether anyone on the panel believes we will see a Tower of Joy 3.0 in Winds or A Dream for Spring, and any guesses as to what that would look like if so. I'm not sure about that. I think this is more about, like what I said about George kind of preparing to re-explain the original Tower of Joy because it hasn't fully been fleshed out. But I'm open to other interpretations. What do y'all think? Lady Gwyn, you go first this time.
Yeah, I agree with you because I think the Tower of Joy, Rhaegar and Lyanna is kind of the central mystery from which so much of the story we're talking about flows. So I just think it's going to be more exposition about what happened there.
Cool. What about you, Steven?
He's got his job cut out for him with that. So.
Yeah. I kind of agree that I think there may be something similar in, like, I don't necessarily think we're gonna see like an exact replication of hashtag boat sex, but like there's got to be some moment for Jon and Daenerys when their story kind of hits its peak, because like you need something to reflect back to when like the sacrifices have to happen.
That's a great point. Yeah.
But like I agree that I think there's like enough time that's going to need to be spent just sort of explaining what actually happened at the Tower of Joy in a way that actually kind of lands emotionally. I think that was my major problem with the way that the show did it, in that it was all kind of like fact-based, or like, oh my god, Jon's actually a Targaryen and he's legitimate after all. But like what we didn't really get was like, and this is the payoff for like Ned's whole story. This is the payoff for like Jon's whole identity crisis. That's the stuff that kind of has to land.
I like that theory a lot, bringing up Jon and Dany there, because there's a lot of potential for a lot of different people to dislike their pairing, to react to object to it on moral grounds, on political grounds, for a lot of different reasons. So, and forget the fact that Jon will be undead. I mean, that just creates a whole nother wrinkle, which the show is kind of ignoring.
Yeah, his whole humanity is an open question.
Yeah, can he even breathe? I mean, does his junk still work? I don't know. Like, there's all these weird questions that have to be.
Oh Lord, I thought we'd gotten away with this when like we were still debating whether Bran can still have kids. It's like, oh, please, let's not go into necrophilia.
How many different Starks do we have to talk about whether their things work? Yeah. Another comment / question from Jojo Lady Dane says that she points out that the Scarlet Shadow is a bit of a nod to Lyanna in a sense, because even though she's more of a nod to Brienne, because the Scarlet Shadow is introduced as a mystery knight.
Yeah.
So that is a good catch. Very good catch. I like that. And of course, this is at the Golden Wedding. Right? I think so, right? I think it was at the Golden Wedding. Yeah.
Yeah, she was at the War for the White Cloaks.
Right.
Imagine if she would have won.
Yeah, that would have been cool. That would have been shades of the Renly's Rainbow Guard for sure. Then
really, yes, yeah.
Okay, so let us talk about the Doctrine of Exceptionalism. Actually, no. Let's go back to our parallel lives and answer that real quick, and then we'll do the Doctrine of Exceptionalism, and then we are done for the day. The answer to the question, I think a lot of you probably figured it out. And it's sequential, right? We got Aegon V and Aegon VI. Both of them, Aegon V shaved his head. Aegon VI dyes his hair. They both are introduced wearing straw hats. They have very similar eye color. I mean, of course, purple. And I don't mean purple. I mean, I think it's specifically dark purple that they both have. Mm-hmm. And Sir Duck and Sir Dunk. I can see, if you hadn't ever noticed that comparison, that's one you'll never forget now. Dunk and Duck, right? And they're both very loyal to their king, and from a young age. I pointed out that one of them, they each attacked someone that got in trouble for it. Dunk attacked Aerion, Brightflame, and got in trouble for that. And Duck attacked the era of, I think it was Long Table, one of those reach houses, and had to, after the heir stole his sword, and he hammered him and had to run to the Golden Company. So, because they have so many other things in common, and because wildfire is a very possible thing for King's Landing, and young Griff / Aegon VI is not unlikely to be in King's Landing around the same time that a lot of these predictions for wildfire coming. We could have them dying in the same manner as well, although I don't think young Griff is going to die to wildfire while trying to hatch eggs. That is almost certainly what happened to Aegon V, so they could both die to wildfire, which would be, well, that would really slam dunk this parallel if it isn't already quite clear. So that's pretty strong. I like that one a lot. It's pretty straightforward. One of the more straightforward parallels. And, we'll just have to see how it goes. Do you guys have anything to add to that? I think a lot of that we talked about already, but just in case, I'll throw that over to you guys.
Nope, that's about right.
Nope.
All right, cool. Well, let's go to the Doctrine of Exceptionalism. Okay, the point behind the Doctrine of Exceptionalism was to figure out a workaround between the Targaryen background and incest and their dragons to make it work with the fact that the Seven were not okay with pretty much any of those things. So, Lady Gwyn, you've got several notes here I can see, so let's start with you. We have one of the ways this takes place is that they send out 7 sort of messengers who spread the word. So yeah, tell us about them.
Well, so they go out. There's 3 men, 4 women. 3 of them are Septons. Septon Rolo, Septon Alfin will be important pretty soon in Jaehaerys' plotting. But I noted cunning Septon Baldric, who's a nod to character Baldric from Blackadder, whose catchphrase was, "I have a cunning plan." So if you're a Blackadder fan, I hope you picked up on that one. And then a couple of Septas and a Mother Maris from the Vale, and Queen Eleanor Costaigne, one of the Black Brides, wandering around in her queenly raiment, turned out to be a very effective ambassador for explaining this doctrine and getting people on board with how Maegor's evil was not represented in these new, she was very good ambassador for saying, no, these guys are good. And
yeah, she would know, right?
She would know. So
that's a good point.
So that's the group that's sent out to preach this doctrine, which I just have to say that as soon as I read this, I was so excited. I mean, I think for me, this was the biggest thing to come out of this, because it explains so much about Targaryens and maybe RLJ and just, how did we get around all of this stuff?
Yeah. So I pointed out that this was to resolve several issues of the Targaryens, which is true, but I should be more clear that the main thing they're trying to get a sign off on Jaehaerys and Alysanne's marriage. That's the number one issue, is to get the faith to accept that. Stephen, let's get a take from you before we move on to other details here.
Yeah, so they're kind of an interesting bunch. In a sense, they make sense as like, okay, there needed to be some constituency within the faith for this doctrine to work. They have like a little bit of a regional basis in that they're kind of come from the Crownlands, a lot of them. So, there's that little bit more of a sense of like, we think of the Targaryens as something different than humans. The whole dragon seed thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like this a little. The Joffrey Doggett stuff is sort of, high romanticism. This is a little bit more the like messy, liturgical politics of how you actually make, lasting change in the faith of the Seven. I still, I'm going to be crabby about this. I still want the bit where Septon Barth goes down to negotiate with the High Septon about the closing down the faith militant and the courts, because like that's to me a really interesting and important incident that doesn't really get addressed in Fire and Blood.
Yeah, and it's so relevant for the series, for A Song of Ice and Fire too, right now with the High Sparrow and everything. All these issues are coming back, so this is very relevant.
So I don't know why that got on the cutting room floor, but it's still like, this makes more sense to me as like medieval politics, that you establish a theory, and then the next job is you get either a pope or a council to sit down, and accept your theory as doctrine, and everything else is heresy. And it reminds me a little bit of the fan fiction I wrote about the High Spider, where I was trying to sort of have a similar kind of ideological conflict over this issue of, the seven are seven gods, or there's seven in one, or there's the old gods and the new, or there's just the new gods. But it's like good to see the faith actually acting like, a medieval church, as opposed to this sort of kind of amorphous and indistinct blob.
The faith of the blobbin.
And I did like, just in terms of like how the like religious reaction to Jaehaerys and Alysanne works out, I think is a little like, it's more plausible to me at this point that you would get these sort of fanatic assassins, right, who don't care if they're gonna live or die, because like the Seven are gonna take them up into their bosom if they die or whatever. Because the faith militant is like smashed. Like now we know that we've got a fuller description of what that military conflict was like. Like almost none of their leaders are left alive by this point, and the few who are alive have now been bought into the system already through Jeffrey Doggett. So it's less the case that you're going to have an uprising, because I think at this point no one wants that. But assassination is a real, an entirely different kind of threat that states have to deal with. And coming up with, a way to sort of disarm the faith theologically is as much important as disarming them militarily.
Yeah. So yeah, well said. Another thing that this touches on is how important it is for the faith to sign off on whoever the king is. We see that in A Song of Ice and Fire. Cersei makes a big deal out of getting Tommen, getting the faith to crown Tommen, because she recognizes how important that is as far as a symbol of legitimacy. And Lady Gwyn, you have some thoughts on the divine right and how that really plays into what we're seeing here. Strong real world parallels. George is borrowing from a lot of real world monarchy, at least Western monarchies, and Eastern as well, but more so Western. And tell us, you got a lot of notes here. So yeah, go off.
I think, Stephen, I think one of your quibbles is that a lot of times this sort of detail is left out. This sort of, how do you deal with, how is he dealing with the faith, and how that's
what's the content of it?
What's the content exactly? So here finally we got this sort of this doctrine, which I thought was very reminiscent of the doctrine of divine right that medieval kings used to make sure everybody knew that no one could gainsay them. They were above everything. They answered directly to God, just a line from them to the man upstairs. And that became that got them into some trouble with politics, with the papacy. We had a lot of real world kind of machinations around kings and popes and who had what rights, and how do they define that? I'm not seeing that here, but I'm really interested to see if someday he might maybe expand on this, because he's thrown this out there.
So the other thing it reminded me of a little bit, just this doesn't come up as much in the text, but there's the whole move where like Jaehaerys says, I am now the protector of the faith. You don't need a military because I'm going to protect you. And what we haven't yet established is like, when did we get from a position of like kings influencing church elections to kings choosing who the Pope, who the High Septon is. Sorry, I'm my metaphors.
The High Popton.
The High Popton.
I was gonna say, it reminds me a little bit of Gallicanism or Galicianism, which was this position, intellectual, ideological position within the Catholic Church that sort of says, we're still going to be Catholics, we're not going to become Protestant, but like the monarch's authority is like similar to the Pope's, and therefore the national customs can kind of trump what the College of Cardinals wants. And this comes into a lot of like, okay, who gets to appoint bishops. So it's sort of like, we're not going to go so far as to say like, okay, every man's his own priest and, there is no Pope, but we're not going to go to the route of like, okay, we have to listen to everything the Pope says. This is the sort of the quid pro quo for coming down on, on the Counter-Reformation side. So it reminded me a little bit of that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So one of of course, obviously we've discussed the point of the doctrine of exceptionalism in terms of why it mattered for Jaehaerys and Alysanne in the realm, but of course it matters even more how it might play out in A Song of Ice and Fire, as in, will it be brought up? Was Rhaegar aware of it when he made his move with Lyanna? Was that potentially his angle with regards to polygamy? Will it be brought up again? Not just because of Rhaegar, but in super current times, like Rhaegar was obviously 15, 16, 17 years ago, now that there are dragons again, and other exceptional things like the others and skin changers, actual undead, like I could see this mattering, right?
I think John could make a fairly cogent statement that like, I died and came back from the dead. The idea that human laws apply to me anymore.
Wow, you're right, because we're already thinking that until my watch is like, he's already got that out from the Night's Watch from dying, and so exactly. But we might not have taken that far enough. He's like, I'm also exceptional in this way.
Now
as well.
I'm really exceptional.
Yeah. Certainly, I think Rhaegar would have known about it because clearly, Rhaegar's father and mother were brother and sister. So, I'm sure he would have been aware of that, given the way that the Targaryens sort of flipped back and forth between marrying outside and marrying inside after the dragons went. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the logic behind, like, I can not just, run off with Lyanna, but like marry and make our child legitimate, because I think his whole idea of like, you need 3 heads of the dragon, like, I think that was very much, driving a lot of this. It's interesting we haven't seen it applied yet in terms of polygamy. And like, I wonder whether we'll see this come up, if it doesn't come up in, the Winds of Winter, but maybe in Fire and Blood Volume 2 when we get to the Blackfires.
Yes.
And the theory that Daemon wanted to marry both Daenerys and Jaehaerys of Tyrosh.
Yeah, I think the fact that
Rohan
of Tyrosh, that's it.
I think the fact that he mentioned that, that was floated, to me, that supported that this doctrine was meant to just place them above across the board. You can practice incest, you
blanket
can
exception,
polygamy, you can do what you want.
I wonder if that works for like oath breaking and kinslaying.
Bad optics, but maybe technicality, they could get away with it.
I mean, seriously. But I do think Rhaegar would have been aware of it. I think that
he was bookish.
The existence of this would be why Targaryens thought they could continue even without dragons.
Yes.
Practicing incest and maybe even floating the idea of polygamy, because Jaehaerys went to such trouble to make sure that this became part of the faith, the doctrine of the faith. So now something, so flip to real world politics. Once something becomes part of, church doctrine, it's kind of hard to kick it out of there unless it's specifically overturned or challenged. And so that would be the question at some point, I think in Fire and Blood 2 or some other history reference, was this ever overturned?
Yeah.
If it wasn't, then it still exists. It's part of it. And maybe it was just forgotten by people. Like, we have these, I don't know if this is just Massachusetts, but we have these laws, blue laws.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them have been changed at this point, but there's just wacky laws dating back to the 16 and 1700s that
we have them here too.
You couldn't spit off a bridge on Sunday.
You can't sell cars in Indiana on Sunday. That's still a law.
I live in New York City, where the wets beat the dries on this political issue.
Yeah, that's true. You couldn't buy alcohol in Georgia on Sundays until 2012.
Same here. You couldn't do anything on Sunday when I was a kid, and it's gradually, there's still things you can't do on Sunday.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's just no politician wants to bother touching that. Like, let's make sodomy legal again. That was another one in Georgia.
We can finally spit off bridges, though.
So back on topic for a second.
Yeah.
I think one place that this might come up interestingly is, we were talking about the second Golden Wedding, right? We know that the High Sparrow is someone who does not look well on the sort of what we could call the Jaehaerys settlement, right? He prefers the sort of an imagined pure church that existed before that, that was then sullied by worldly politics. And I wonder, like, does that come up with the whole issue of, like, if Aegon VI decides that he wants to marry, his first cousin in Arianne, B, his aunt in Daenerys, and, related to that, if he wants to get married twice.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if the High Sparrow is going to go along with that. Although, there is the whole, like, other issue that, like, if my interpretation, and I'm not the only one, like, if the interpretation of the whole Mummer's Dragon thing and the crowd cheering is that, like, Aegon gets the nod from the High Sparrow because, Tommen is revealed to be a bastard born of incest, like, how much does that commit the High Sparrow with regard to Aegon? Like, once you've tossed out one king and chosen a new one, doing that twice gets a little bit difficult because normally you have to make some sort of commitment to be like, this new guy is the one.
Yeah. So let me say something here too. I agree with I like that you brought up the possibility of multiple wives. I think that's entirely possible. And one reason I think that's possible is that George has been writing young Griff in a way that shows that he's not going to be a puppet. He's not going to do everything that Varys and John Connington want him to do. He's going to do some things on his own.
He is very kind of reckless.
Yes.
And I think especially will be very sure of himself if he takes the Iron Throne, because it will have been these sort of series of like magnificent gambles.
Yeah.
Right? You know, you're going west instead of going east, and then you take Storm's End, and then you take the Iron Throne, and by this point he'll be sort of like a little bit, you know, of Alexander the Great. He's like, oh, you know, I've done so much that I can't possibly make a mistake. Oh, I've made a huge mistake.
That's a great parallel.
Famous last
That's
words,
a great parallel. Yeah, because I mean
he'll be standing in for elephants.
He'll be like 17 or 18 and have had waited all this time to take his throne, and then everything's going to go his way, especially that stuff I was talking about with Varys working behind the scenes, kind of just like smooth the behind the scenes stuff. He's not even aware these things are being smoothed out for him. He's just going to think it's like a destiny thing or something. And as a great point, raising the issue of the cloth dragons and the cheering crowds, which segues to this point that I have in our document about the faith will clearly favor young Griff over Daenerys if it comes down to that. We have him being male, him being not a direct product of incest, and he doesn't have dragons. Daenerys is female, the direct product of incest. And all this foreigner stuff that, you know, isn't going to be popular with her association with Dothraki and priests of R'hllor and all this. There's just so much for them to hate, really, given their sentiments in general. So I think that it's super important that the faith are rising again and that they're going to have to be handled. Even young Griff, who I think, like I said, is the preferable candidate from their point of view, could do things that they really don't like. And that could be what some of this Fire and Blood stuff is foreshadowing. Another really important character that we need to talk about, or not character, but house, is the Hightowers. Of course, a running theme of all the A Song of Ice and Fire histories, whether it's Aegon's conquest, whether it's Maegor's rule, whether it's Aenys' time, whether it's the Dance of the Dragons, whether it's any of these things, up until the modern times. The current story, the story we're most familiar with, is the only place that the Hightowers don't figure prominently. And this is a little bit confusing to me because there's a lot of forks here in this road, which is that, well, the Hightowers could get involved now that the Fagon plot's coming in. We've got Euron and Sam dealing with Old Town. But that's also why they may not get involved. They may be a little too busy with Euron and whatever is happening down there to get involved in the ascension of young Griff at all. So this one's tough to call because there's, like I said, a lot of forks in the road. What do you guys think? This will be our last. We'll be wrapping up here. I know we're a little over our normal time, so we'll make this our last topic and then call it quits for the night.
I think the Hightowers are going to be busy with Euron and Sam personally. It's also sort of notable that like they didn't really commit themselves in the War of Five Kings at all. I mean, some of their subordinates were sent off, but they're like the core of their strength has been kept out of it. I think for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Lady Gwyn?
Yeah, I think there's going to be some bit of action in Old Town. We're going to see them for sure. I don't know to what extent they're going to be on the, for lack of a better term, national stage.
Yeah.
But they're definitely, the fact that they haven't been involved so far is significant. I mean, we have to see them. And like Steven said, they're relatively untouched. They're kind of like the Veil in that regard. They're still.
I think they're about to get touched pretty hard, though. Yeah, we seem to agree on that. By 10 tentacles all at once and some fire. Yeah. So it's interesting. Another thing that I noticed here, I think other people surely have as well, is that the Hightowers very consistently played, maybe took out important figures here and there when they religious figures, especially when they needed to be taken out. Maybe Septon Moon, just kind of his death was very mysterious, and it happened really right when the High Towers needed it to. And the same thing with the guy who was in charge before, when Maegor and Visenya were bearing down on the city and everyone was freaking out, saying, "Look, you better give in to what they want, or those dragons are going to screw us." So, and then the High Septon died in the middle of the night when he was standing up to everyone. So, it just makes me think maybe the High Towers would get involved in being the one to take out the current High Septon, but it doesn't. But I don't know that things will go that way. It feels like that could happen, but the way things are going, I don't, like you guys say, I think we're all in agreement that Euron is far more likely to be a reason for the High Towers to not be involved. So
maybe,
I don't know.
I kind of just based on listening to some of the stuff Stephen was saying earlier, I was thinking how great it would kind of be if we had like the equivalent of a papal schism. And maybe the High Towers or somebody, kind of nominated their own competing High Septon, and you just have
that would be
Aegon show up and say, "Oh, you don't like this? Okay, well, I got my own High Septon."
Interesting. That's a good idea. We'll have to think about that some more. We'll have to marinate on that idea.
Yeah.
Okay. I see a great question from LML, but we're running out of time. So this is a good question. We can start the next episode with this one. I always save room at the beginning for questions that we didn't get to last time around. So we'll close off here. We'll let our guests tell everybody where to find them and repeat what you guys are up to in the near future, and then we will sign off. So, Lady Gwyn, tell everybody what you're up to, what Radio Westeros is up to, and where to find you all out on the interwebs.
Okay, well, you can find us at radiowesteros.com. You can also catch us on iTunes, on YouTube. As of recently, we are working on, actually, I believe this week for patrons should be Thorn Sword. Been going through the Tales of Dunk and Egg, so I've got the Thorn Sword coming out. So if you're a patron, look out for that this week, out for the general public next week. Following that, got the Dance of the Dragons collaboration I'm working on with you. And you mentioned patron exclusive episodes. I'm also working on our second patron exclusive episode. Topic is a secret for the moment.
Oh, cool. I was going to say your first one was awesome. That's a great one.
The first one that we have that's still there for patrons is on Varamir, but we're going to be, and same as you, it's the 2018 patron exclusive.
Most of the work was done in 2018. So
that'll be announced shortly as well. So. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Stephen, please tell everybody again what you're working on and where to find you.
Well, at the moment, I'm mostly working on getting my new course prepped for the beginning of the semester. But in terms of fandom stuff, I'm working on sort of finishing up the Jaehaerys section of Fire and Blood, and I want to get Hour of the Wolf done, and then it's back to A Storm of Swords.
Cool. Awesome. Well, excuse me.
And you can find my stuff at Race for the Iron Throne at WordPress and at Tumblr.
Definitely. And Stephen and I have on the shelf plans to do a episode on the Nine Penny Kings, which we'll get around to at some point. That's a little supplement to our Blackfire coverage.
Yeah, sometime after February.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we all have so much to do. That's great. Yeah, no rush on that one, but it would be fun to get to eventually. Okay, so thanks very much to my guests for coming. Thanks very much to Ashea for running things behind the scenes as always and keeping an eye on the chat and all the technical stuff. Thanks to everyone who showed up to watch live. The chat looked pretty busty today. Lots of great conversations. I wish I could have been participating in those conversations while participating in conversations with my guests. But we can't always can't do all those things at once. That's just how it goes. So a little FOMO there. Okay, so let me do our closing credits and we will say adios. I know, Stephen, you got to go. So if you need to drop out right now.
Okay, see you all later.
We'll decent chance we'll have you back for another one of these. We'll be running these until April at the least, so we'll hopefully do that. See you next time. And let's say thanks to our Patreon supporters. We've got Our other dragon riders, Lord Mark of House Joseph, the Snow and Winterfell, rider of Mazlacartho, the white dragon with green scales, horns, wings, and talons. Rest in peace. Jinx of House Lier, the green queen of the Rainwood, rumored daughter of a woods witch, rider of Erogenia, the sylphic albino dragon with amethyst eyes and opalescent wings. Our Hand of the King is the mysterious BR. The Smiling Wolf, Lord Stephen Stark of the Broken Tower, soldier, scholar, philosopher, diplomat, is Hand of Queen Ashea, who is known as the Best. Lady Suzanne Sinistral is the Learned, holder of the left-handed Valyrian shears called Penance, Hand of the Beard. Lord Jim the Fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog and the Two-Age War podcast is Warden of the West. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning is Lord of the Chiliad and Warden of the East. Cabethian Frozen is Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Defender of the Old Gods and Warden of the North. Lady Kelly McMath of Covington is Lady of the Villa Hills and Crescent Springs, Warden of the South. Lord James Tuttle is King of the Stepstones and Narrow Sea, Commander of the Royal Fleet, consisting of the Narrow Fleet led by Flagship Caraxes and the Bloodstone Fleet led by Flagship Prince Daemon. Our small council includes Lord James Inkblade, the Scholar Knight, Master of Whisperers, Lord Robert Jacobs, the Master of Coin, Lord Daniel the Sneaky Russian, Master of Ships, Grand Maester Via James, and Lord Benjen of House Hornwood, Master of Laws. Lords and ladies in their castles include Lady Direlys of Castle Naki, the Alpha Patron, Lord Dan of the Red Mountains and Castle Great Bell, Breaker of the Second Stone, Lord Skip of the Velt, Lord of Castle Ganges, Gregor the Toasty, Lord of the Bread Fort, Alicia Everlasting of the Green Blood is Lady of Desert Rose, Lord Ryan of Castle Stonegate is Guardian of the Rocky Mountain Pass, Lord Garin de Haviland is of Devil's Hand Keep, Ashlyn Winter is the Hawk's Eye, Lady of Castle Skyfall, Lady Mikkel of Moonacre is leader of the Werewood Protectorate Alliance, the Lord of the Halls of Castle Hillcrest is wielder of the Valyrian Steel Machete Everglazed. Lord Alistair Whitaker is Lord of the Dawnhold. Lord Bemmy Snugglebunny is guardian of the hidden 100-acre Werewood, dual-wielding Glorious Morning and Little Light Wise. Brian the Defender is Lord of the Spearfort and the Freelands, last scion of Clan McCulloch, Strength and Courage. The Bastard of the Wolfswood is first forester of the Old Gods, sworn to House Ironwerewood, listen for the silence. Connor the Dungeon Master is Lord of Catamount Keep and Guardian of the Smoky Mountain Pass. Lady Baelish is Dark Widow of Harrenhal. Lord Sidney Jesse is the Fallborn, Lord of Blue Spring. Nevessa the Twin-Hearted is Suspected Skin Changer, is holder of Castle Carahelm. Sir Valentin of House DeGen is creator of the Game of Predictions, free Game of Thrones predictions/futures market. Lady Lyanna Kelly is of Wolf Island, protectress of the Steelhold. Casey Stark is of House Acres. Lady Kay is of House Archer, Lady of Earth Dog Hall, Huntress of the Wolfswood, and Guardian of Matty Squirrel's Bane, the mighty Direweedy. King's Justice is Sir Troy the Steady, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Blade Fate. Lady My Emerald Eyes is Voice of House Swan, Mistress of Whispers on the Queen's High Council. Rebea Star Eyes is Lady of Waves and Mistress of Ships, Captain of the Iron Shadowcat. In the shadows we bear our claws. Grand Maester Elizabeth is middle daughter of Lyanna Mormont, first lady to forge both the Silver and Valyrian Steel link. Our King's Guard is led by Lady Miriam and backed up by Sir Dolores D, longest tenured White Sword, and Willa Crowsbane, Guardian of White Tree, First Lady of the Free Folk, and Sir Dean the White, Knight of the Black Star. Queen's Guard, led by Lord Captain Commander Haema Helmont, the Sellsword Sentinel. Alexander of House Atreides from the seat of Dune, I Must Not Fear, Fear is the Mind Killer. Becca the Bard, Songbird of the North. Michonne the Melodious, Star of Old Town, is Minds Over Masters. Sir Rambo, Knight of House Gannon, First Blood. Sir Leon of House Walker, wielder of the twin Valyrian Steel Blades, Fire and Ice, and the Werewood Bow, Rain. Introducing Amber the Adamant, the Knight of the Mist and Mother of Squids. Our Beard Guard is led by Lord Commander George the Golden, backed up by Sir Joshua Oakhart, the White Oak, Lady Rita of the Coppermane, the Unbound, Dance the Fervor, Sir Jeff Warden of the AC, wielder of Triad, the multifaceted beard and platinum red and brown, Stay Frosty. Sir Tim Corgyle is Mad Boy of the Western Desert. Queen Helena von Landstein is partying like it's 1999 since 1980-something. A Kingdom for a Drink. And last but certainly not least, the history of Westeros' Night's Watch, which is led by Lord Commander Benjen Umber, the Silent Giant, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Greatsword Winter's Kiss. First Ranger Zach Nafane Fourfeathers, fastest bow in the watch. First Builder Maegor Snow, a.k.a. Maegor the Cool, the Fire and the Snow. And First Steward Sir Jurion of the Torrentine, called Palewind. That is a nice long list of lovely and excellent supporters. Thank you very much to everyone who has supported the show in all the various ways, whether liking us on iTunes or Acast or just spreading the word to your friends. We certainly appreciate it. And we will see you next time. Thanks again to our guests and everyone who attended, and to Ashea, and to Michael Klarfeld, and Jesse Townsend, or Jesse Kowal, and Joey Townsend for the music. And we'll see you next time. Valar, reread us. Cool. Thanks again. That was good.